I live in a town where you can still hear church bells chime on a Sunday morning, where families gather with pride to watch their children grow like flowers in the sun. We honor the brave who sacrificed for our country and those who continue to serve and protect us. In the spirit of love, belonging, and acceptance, this program was created. I'm Marie Wyman, and welcome to Close to Home. Today we have as our guests Rosalie, Massie, Blackburn, and Patricia Faldetta. Rosalie Massie Blackburn, along with her brother Joseph Massie, wrote a book entitled The Ghosts of St. Anne's Past. The book is about all the children who have passed through the doors of St. Anne's Orphanage in Worcester, Massachusetts. Hi everyone, and welcome to Close to Home. Welcome my guests today. Rosalie Massie Blackburn, and Pat Faldetta. Hi. Today we're going to talk about the children that passed through the doors of St. Anne's Orphanage in Worcester. And this book that we're previewing today is a very interesting story about the children and what happened to them, and how in later years many of them sought closure about their experiences. So, let's just get right into it. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, it come to a point where my brother Joseph and I kept the secret of being there and growing up there. And we needed to know what happened to us the years that we didn't have. And so we decided to come up to Worcester and go up to where St. Anne's was. And we visited the grotto, and then at that point, we decided that we needed to get more information, and we worked through the websites and got people to respond to our questions, and the book is all written about all the children and the stories that they told us about St. Anne's,
and this was a very interesting part of the history of the building itself. Many people actually went by this building for years and years and years and never knew the real story behind some of the children that were there.
Right.
And you talk about the ghosts of St. Anne's Pass, and who were they actually?
The ghosts of St. Anne's Past were the children that grew up there, like Pat and myself, and their experiences, good and bad, that they encountered while they were there.
Wow.
And they took us and told us so many stories that we didn't know, especially from 1889 to 1970.
And that's when the years of operation, actually.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And
75
Pat,
years.
You were actually a resident there too, around the same time that Rosalie and her brother Joe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't remember them, but I was there for about 4 years and left for a brief period of time and then went back. It was an interesting place to be. I was about 4 years old, and I was there with my other siblings. I had a brother and 2 other sisters who were there. Good times and bad times, happy times, sad times.
Just like anything.
Lots of things,
life.
yeah. And I think when they started talking about the book, and I met them there at the grotto about a year ago. I hadn't been there, even though I live in Northborough, I hadn't been there for many years. Like you said, you drive past, you don't even notice anything. So it's definitely changed a lot, but.
Well, we need to kind of go back and explain to the audience, I think, how this all came about. I guess in 1891, the Grey Nuns were sent down from Montreal, Canada, to care for the orphans. The French-Canadian Orphanage of Worcester, which later became St. Anne's Orphanage, as we're speaking of right now, that was around 1891. They actually remained in Worcester, the nuns, the Grey Nuns, what they call the Grey Nuns, remained in Worcester until 1987. And it's interesting to note that along the way, they cared for more than 11,000 children in those years that they were in existence. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you know, we needed to do as far as adults in our life. Some of us have things we need to close the door on, like Rosalie talks about. And as children, you weren't really told much about what was happening to you, and really not much about speaking about it either. Is that correct?
That's right. We were told when we left there that day that that was it. The door was locked. It stayed there, and it was stayed locked away for many, many, many years. Like 60 years.
And you had, just before the program, we just talked a little bit about it, and you said that your brother Joseph actually didn't have a lot of memories
He didn't have
of
any.
his experience. He was a year younger than you.
Yes.
You were 5 and he was 4. So he really didn't have a lot of
Right.
on the surface, let's
Right.
put it that way. But tell the audience what happened, interestingly enough.
Well, what happened is when we got to Worcester, we went to the library. We figured, well, anybody had information, them and the museum would. Well, the museum had nothing, but the library had a little folder with stuff in it, and Joe opened it up and he was looking, and there was a picture of the orphanage in the playground. And in the playground, there was 3 spots of big girls, little girls, and boys. And between the little girls and the boys was a ramp. And Joe used to be on this side, and I was there, and there was monkey bars. And he would get up on the monkey bars and wave to me. And he would roll the ball up, and we would pass the ball, and that was the only time I saw him. You know, it was sort of like a distance love affair, I guess you would say. And when he saw that picture, he started crying, and he was just like, wow, we couldn't believe it. Got very emotional. So that's how it started for him.
And you knew at that point in your life, your brother, your dear sibling, whom you loved very, very much, you needed to open the door and kind of review how this process affected your lives on some of it was very traumatic. So when you got that was sort of the inspiration of the book. You knew you had to do that. And then you gradually got information and you went online, isn't that correct? And had a website, and tell us about that. What happened?
What happened is we went on and we looked for St. Anne's Orphanage, and we found pages of residents and families looking for information and telling their stories, and we were reading them. And as we sat there and started reading their stories, we got, oh my God, I remember that, I remember that. And then more and more Joe got to realize that it was everything we were talking about was indeed true. You know?
There was a need out
so
there.
we needed to go find out more, and we needed to know when we were there, why we were there, how we were there, and that was a very difficult thing for us to do because nobody would give us information, the Catholic Charities and stuff like that. But we worked on the Catholic Charities, and we love them. We love them to death because they told Pat a lot about herself and a lot of other residents. So it's been a wonderful journey for us.
Yeah,
it
they
really
steered
has.
us. Well, Catholic Charities steered us in the right direction. If you weren't an orphan, if you were in a foster home after you left there, the family, Boston Families for Children and Families, actually, I contacted them and got a lot of my records from later, but some of it did include St. Anne's as well. St. Anne's themselves did not, there were no files, no records. They had a log book. When a child came in, it was an intake log. They would log in, a child, you know, a girl is at such and such an age, this is her birthday. They mostly got the information either from a parent or whoever brought them in, and then that was it. So they really,
yeah, I think, you know, the audience has to remember that, you know, in the time period that we're talking about, the fluctuations in the climate, of financial climate, the immigration and the refugees that came into the country, the wars that happened, displaced thousands and thousands and thousands of children, as warranted, that we know of, the orphan trains that went to the Midwest, you know, to give children homes out in the Midwest, sometimes for the good, sometimes not so good. And we have to understand that when we talk about children, there is a distinction between the orphans and the children that were there for a short period of time. Is that
right.
correct?
And some of them were there just because their parents couldn't find work. And they couldn't afford to keep them at home. So they brought them to the orphanage, whether it was for 3 months, 6 months, in some cases, like mine, a few years. Parents, you know, divorce wasn't really prominent back then, or you didn't talk about it. So single parents who couldn't afford to keep their children. It just, people were sick. If the mother had to go in the hospital, father had to work. There was no place, nobody to watch the kids sometimes.
Yes, at that time, there wasn't child care as we know of it today.
Right, exactly,
that existed. And even if there was, it probably, you know, it wasn't affordable because of the financial situations. I wanted to talk a little bit about your brother Joe, and how you two got together, and you had this spark of when you went online, when we're getting back to that, you went online and you discovered such a need for people to leave their comments and their stories with you.
Yes.
And then your brother and you actually helped people connect with their past.
Exactly.
Tell us about that.
Well,
we know Pat because of the friendship that you developed. But tell us a little bit about what other people you helped.
Well, we have the website and we have the Facebook page, and on the website, if anybody wants to know anything, they need to contact Joe, because he's the main person, and they would tell him what they're looking for and what's going on, and get the names and stuff, and Joe would try to find out about them. And of course, he couldn't find out much, but they would give him information to let somebody else contact them so that they could get their own.
He was a resource, in other words.
He was definitely, we were definitely a resource. And the stories that we heard, and you know, we cried reading some of the stories that we heard, and some of them cried because they were happy that we gave them the resources to help them find who they are. And one is this girl that was there with us. Her name was Carmen. She was there through the Cuban crisis, and she had no idea. Those kids came, they thought Mom and Dad was going to come and get them. Nothing ever happened. Those kids all were there, and they all got broke up eventually, which was promised that they wouldn't. But Carmen was one, and she came, and she had to learn French from Spanish to English, and she had to learn a lot. And she said, you know, I went to New York and I learned how to, I was the only one there that knew how to speak French. And we got her to find out who she was, where she came from, her parents and everything. And that's what she's been working on this past year, to find out more information and where she can get a hold of them. So it's really wonderful that the things that we've done.
In the early 60s?
She was there,
59,
yes, she
60.
was there in the early 60s. It's in the book about the children coming. And in the book, the 60s is more or less not the orphanage, it's Mount St. Anne, because the orphanage was broken apart at that point. But some of the children that were there did come from the orphanage and went there, and there was like 30 children. And they went to the Newman house for a while until Mount St. Anne got built, and when Mount St. Anne got built, the children went there.
So that was in the 60s then?
Yes.
Yeah, that was in the 60s.
So it's a little bit different than the rest of the story because of the fact that it's a different lifestyle of children there. Right. Even though they were homeless and
so
non-wanted.
The Facebook page is basically something that if someone is interested in finding out the years that they were at St. Anne's, they can come,
yes.
So it's St. Anne's Orphanage. Worcester@gmail.com, right?
That's to reach Joe
Okay.
and to tell them their story without anybody else seeing it. And then if they say, yes, you can tell my story like Pat did for us in the beginning, and they sent pictures and things like that. We got pictures of us we never even knew existed. It was like, I looked at the pictures and I thought, oh my God, that's me. I mean, how could somebody that I don't even know have pictures of me?
Well, that's part of the whole closure that we talked about.
And it made you feel so good.
Now, you talk about, the book itself is basically based on true facts.
It's true facts. It's true stories of residents or residents' families that sent us the stories. And what we did is we tried to put more than one story that worked together, so that it wasn't like you said this and that was it. It was like you said and you said. Well, if two people said it, it had to be more or less true.
It had to have some basis in
Right,
fact.
we had to have some kind of basis. There's a few that weren't, but most are, yes.
And that took a lot of time and research on your
Yes.
part, didn't it, and Joe's part?
Yes.
We have to tell you that, we're talking about her brother, Joe, and he's right now, he's actually not available to speak with us, but at maybe some further time in the future.
He would love it.
Yeah, we'd like to get Joe on too, to get his perspective. It's amazing that the friendship developed between you and Pat, and because of the situation of her being a resident also. When you're children, you don't know whether you actually dream it or whether it's real.
That's
so
true.
That was one of the points I thought was very good that you made to me. You understood when Joe saw things that everything was coming back to him, latent memories, which are very powerful, really. And how do you think, when you and Pat got together, how did you think this was going to go? Did you? Were you afraid that it may not go well, or how did?
When I saw her, I remembered, and I said, "Oh my God!" And we hugged each other, and I said, "Do you remember? Do you remember this?" And we were asking back and forth questions. And it was the stories were so exciting. And so and so really liked you, and I'm going, "What?" And I'm going, "Do I remember that person?"
When you're little, you don't understand. You don't understand things. And I know not to interrupt you, but I know that part of that, such a wonderful feeling you guys got when you went back, it was an instant recognition, and you felt there were so many questions that were being answered at the time. But one of them, which I thought was really beautiful, was the grotto. Tell us the grotto story. I think, Pat, you were involved with that too. And you guys just tell us what happened when you went to visit the grotto.
At the beginning, when we
that was something that was on the grounds of the orphanage, correct?
It's right across the street from where St. Anne's was and where Mount St. Anne's right now, and it's all fenced in now, but it was not back in our days. And it was the most beautiful place you ever wanted to see with the flowers, and it actually was like one of the greatest places to visit back in those days, and we spent a lot of time there kneeling on those rocks. We really
the
did.
nuns took us there a lot.
Yes.
And that was all farmland, by the way, back there.
They had different ceremonies there for First Communions and stuff like that, and the most important one was the crowning of Mary.
The feast of the Blessed Mother.
Right, and we would go there and we would march up, and everybody was dressed in really pretty stuff, and I can remember going up there with the white dress and the ribbons flowing in my hair and the whole thing, and it was just like, I'm the most beautiful princess in the world.
Right.
And Pat did it too, but she doesn't remember.
Yeah, I don't.
Because all the little girls did that.
There for other
and
things.
We did the maypole dance.
Oh yeah.
Which we represented the clouds up in the sky to protect the children.
Isn't that interesting? I remember having been a product of a Catholic school. I remember that we used to have these great St. Patty's Day plays.
Yes.
That was the big thing. We had this great big St. Patty's Day play, and it was various different things that we acted out, but they were very artistic, the nuns, in a lot of areas. Boy, I'll tell you, they really knew how to put a show together.
They did.
They did. And I remember crowning the Blessed Mother
Yeah.
with the roses.
That was
and
the most
flowers
beautiful
and-
ceremony.
Yeah, that was
Oh my
that was
God.
beautiful. I remember when you were talking about that some of my memories about what I did around that same age too came back. So I'm sure it resonated, Rosalie, among a lot of people. The timeline, not to get off the subject
Okay.
of the Blessed Mother and
Okay.
the maypole and all that kind of stuff, but the history and the timeline of St. Anne's Orphanage, Mount St. Anne in Yeovil House. Actually, now, can you tell us a little bit about the now what's there in
What's there now?
yeah, in
Well,
place of what was there in the past?
okay.
Is there,
It's written here on the timeline, and when we got there that day, looking around before we met up with Pat and her husband Frank, we looked around and we saw where the broken up grounds were, and I think it's a daycare center there or something.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just a daycare,
Yeah, or a
but
nursery school or
but I
something.
thought it was really a home, a place for people to go who are displaced at this point. Some of the families that
so
are
it
there.
still holds its roots,
I think,
really.
well,
Yes,
I think
it
it
is.
does, yeah. But
Yeah.
once they tore the buildings
Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
it's a lot different.
It's a lot
than
different,
what
But
it
Mount
used to
St.
be.
Anne is for the homeless, I believe, now.
Yes, right,
And,
displaced, yep.
They were supposed to have torn it down by now, but they haven't. They
Yeah, it
keep
looks
it going. But
The outmoded, the demolition of the outmoded buildings, actually, I think it was around 1923 or something?
no,
It was-
1968 is when they
68?
tore. 1968 is when they tore the buildings down, because that's the end of our story.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
we really wanted to post some pictures in the book of the demolition, but because we didn't want to mess with the people from the Grey Nuns, because we didn't know if they'd let us use them or not. We didn't put any. And it would have been nice to see them, but we do have quite a few
So
pictures
that was
of the
the building
demolition.
that was built in 1923, and it was demolished in 1968.
Right.
I guess. Yeah, that was the
right,
dormitory
right.
building.
There were several buildings.
What they
Yeah.
did is they tore some of them down before, and then the biggest building in the Newman House they tore down last.
Yeah, that's really, when you stop and think about it, people, we've seen
Yeah.
pictures of it. It was huge. It was a huge.
It was a
It was.
huge.
Nobody would
There were, because there was
believe
a
it.
school attached to it, they had a bridge going from the orphanage to the school. So I forget what age the school went up to. But they also had a boys section
Right.
and a girls section. They only kept the boys
were
there until they were
mirror-
about 12, maybe,
mirror
because they
images
didn't
of the
want to
boys.
deal.
No kidding.
Yeah.
The nuns didn't want to deal with anything after the boys were 12.
Oh,
Or
okay.
the girls, boys and girls
Yeah.
together. We
Right.
never saw the boys,
No.
only on the playground, and they
Yeah.
had their own playground. We really didn't
Yeah,
get to.
they
Wow,
did, and
okay,
that's
so it
how
was
I got
kept
to
separate,
wave
yeah.
at Joe every once in a while.
Right.
Now-
Because he'd be waiting.
Now, interestingly enough, when you talk about 1889, the onset of actually what the timeline we're talking
Right.
about, it actually it was a temporary orphanage.
Exactly.
So the French-Canadian Orphanage of Worcester was run by the Third Order of St. Francis,
Right.
which is interesting because then, of course, that was a Victorian age, in the late 1800s. And then as we progressed, your book is interestingly enough that when you were talking to me about the way it's organized,
Right.
you actually draw in many highlights from historical
Right.
facts.
Right.
And that's how you kind of organized your book, right? Correct? Want to tell us
Exactly.
something about
And
that?
we do put in the book different parts, like in 1920, it's that point in time, no, not 1920, it was the Fair of the Heart. And in the Fair of the Heart is 1910, and years, and I don't know if they still do it or not, but they always had the big fairs in town, and St. Anne's used to bring all their wares there and their food and their vegetables and sell them, and that's what made the money through the year. And
It was
when,
a fundraiser, a major fundraiser, because,
Right.
not to interrupt you, but that actually, the site was a huge farm, wasn't
Yes.
it?
Yes, it was.
The site was many
There was
acres.
two of them,
many acres.
Right.
And it was so
And the
getting
first
back-
one was
yeah.
too small, so they went to the other one. Well, the one time when the children were going there, they had a parade with what the reason was, but when the kids were there, President Taft went by in his car with his wife, and that's in the book.
Wow,
and
how interesting.
And he slowed down so the children could see him, and they waved to him, and the kids were just so elated that somebody actually was, that excited to see them, because the children didn't get much
recognition.
No, it was like they weren't worthy enough to be noticed.
Well, that was the
really
era.
hard.
And, I mean,
Yes.
a lot of times, when we talk about things that have happened in places like that, it wasn't talked about. If you
No.
had a problem in your family, you didn't hang out dirty laundry in public. I mean, it was not an open society like we have today,
definitely not.
where things are so a little bit
Publicized.
more,
Everybody
publicized.
knows
That,
everything.
with we have such media, an overblown media, as it were. People are on cell phones constantly. You have so much out there to see, hear, and do. Whereas
I mean, we learned so much going through there and seeing things like a pen when it first came out, and it was like, wow, look at that. Well, people think pen's a pen, but I mean, they had a lot of stuff that came out in
And this was
that
in
time
Canada,
period that
right?
was awesome.
When you were in Canada.
And we looked at it as old and ancient when we were going through time, and it was something brand new, and they were in awe of it, and we were
so
like,
the
wow.
the book basically is organized according to some key points in history that
Exactly.
happened. So that's a good way of organizing it. I thought
Right.
that when you were telling me about
Right.
that. As you look ahead, what do you expect from the book? Your goal about
Well, what I would expect from the book is that if people do get it or purchase it, that they would read it and send us back on Facebook their responses and what they liked about it or what they didn't like. And it would make us feel good, because we've worked really hard to do this.
I imagine.
And we had to break everything down for the years, and stuff was all thrown together. So we had to go through, I have a whole big box like this full of correspondence that I went, because that's the part I did, and then I had to put it in files like 1920, 1930, 1940, 50, 60.
Right,
And
and
then some of them,
organizing it.
you kind of had to guess, and you put it in where you felt it was the best. But the pictures, the pictures.
The pictures are wonderful.
Yes.
So, and to leave our audience with this, it's just been a pleasure to talk to both of you
Thank you
today
so much
about
for
this
having
great
us
book.
here.
It's just wonderful to understand what went into it and how it has affected the lives of others. And I guess what we want to say to the audience is, if you're interested, you can always get on their website. We have a bunch of stuff at the end of the program that will be put on, and you can see where we can get a hold of everyone. St. Anne's Orphanage, Worcester at gmail.com is one, and we also will have something at the end of the program that you can see and get in touch with these people that have done so much work. And I'm sure the book will be a wonderful way of reconnecting with the past, and also getting some closure as to the history, a very important history that was part of Worcester's history and many people of that era. So thank you for joining us today. Until next time.